Agile is about reducing the amount of process overhead, right? But if you take out a little bit of process, you need to replace it with something. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So you need to replace it with something. But that thing that you replace it with is values and principles. If your team has values and principles, then having less process works. What do you call it? The specific methodologies would have different versions of the principles and values. But some of the things they have in common, or some of the more salient points, are customer satisfaction or customer value. Okay. Ken Beck said the reason why he created extreme programming is because he wanted to heal the divide between developers and business people. So in the end, the reason you're doing Agile is not so that you don't have to do documentation, or so that you don't have to do upfront design. The reason you're doing all these things is because you want to create something valuable for customers. You want to create something useful. You want to heal the divide with your stakeholders, your business users. You want them to get something valuable and useful. Next values is evidence-based decision making. We don't do upfront design. We don't pull a schedule out of our butts without a basis. We don't create an architecture based on vendor documentation or blogs that we've read. We create a spike so that we can test it, we can see if it's easy to use, it performs to our expectations. And then we create the architecture. Feedback, visibility, and courage. Agile is about discovering problems and finding solutions early and often when they're cheap to fix. It's about creating a culture of providing feedback, especially about problems. You have to have a culture where people bring up problems early and often. It values eliminating waste, removing activities that don't produce any value, not starting something that while other work is still pending, and human interaction. But if you just use the project management principles, you end up with a project that looks like this. Initially, you're gaining momentum, you're gaining velocity in your team. And then, even if your team is working hard, or you're working harder and harder, the output, the number of stories that you build, your velocity starts to go down. If you pretend that team's capacity is like a tube, you put requirements in on one end, some development happens, and the features come out the other end. Initially, you've got a lot of development of features, you're producing a lot of features. Of course, naturally, you start to have bugs, so you do some bug fixing. So you're able to handle less requirements and less output on features. But then, you start to also have technical debt. So technical debt is when you don't bother to clean up your design, you don't bother to have clean code, or you don't bother to monitor your code quality. It's like incurring debt. It's like having debt that you don't pay. So instead of having resources, you're paying more and more money to pay interest, right? So that's what technical debt is. So the team's capacity is diminished, and you even have more bugs because the code base is more fragile. So iterative development is not just about frequent deliveries. It's about evolving software. You try to get software as quickly as possible to a potentially shippable state. You release things that are useful, people can actually use. You get feedback. And as we get feedback, the team and the stakeholders know more about what features to add to make the system more competitive, make the system more efficient, make the system meet the business objectives. So remember, at the end of each iteration, you're supposed to produce working software. That is the foundation of progress in Agile. There's no such thing as X% done, it's just done or not done. And when you say done, it's tested and ready to deploy. In Agile, it's okay to have fixed budgets. Again, you can't run a company without budgets. You define the business objectives. The scope is variable, all right? So we're not exactly sure what gets finished at the end of, say, the project of 6 months. Then the team delivers something early that meets business needs. So in the first month or so, hopefully the team is able to build something that is usable, that can be released, that people can actually use. And then you base, of course, succeeding iterations, succeeding requirements on the feedback after people actually get use it and are actually deriving value from the system. And then when the project ends, the organization is likely left with something that is valuable, that's already useful, within that fixed budget. Agile is about evidence-based decision-making. Requirements of future iterations are based on the feedback from previous iterations. Schedules are based on the experience from previous iterations, all right? Now that we've done a few iterations, we know our velocity, we can predict that we'll be able to release these features around this time, as opposed to not having any basis for saying those things. And architecture is based on spikes, not literal. Again, you build something, you run some tests, your experience in coding, if it was easy to do, not vendor documentation, not blogs, not whether it's the new hype that's going around. Waterfall decision making, on the other hand, it's creative writing, right? In Agile, design is evidence-based. So you get to the point where there's enough detail in the design for the team to get started, and then the team continues to evolve the design collaboratively. Waterfall design, on the other hand, is again creative writing. How many architectures are out there based on? One, vendors sold the CIO so many stuff that they don't really need. Two, resume-driven architecture. We need to stick EJB here because that looks good in my resume and I want to get a different job. In Agile, we build documentation that's actually read. So user stories are in a form that is meaningful to all parties. It's not intimidating for non-technical users. It expresses business objectives. Acceptance tests remove ambiguity from requirements. So tests are one of the best forms of documentation in Agile. So instead of having just writing down a bunch of stuff in binders, when you have tests, that is a solid definition of the requirement. This is the input, this is the expected output. And then you can run these, you can have automated tools to run these acceptance tests and validate if the system actually implemented the tests. And of course, for us developers, unit tests, again, are some of the most valuable forms of documentation. You know, you can do the /**, and I've run into so much code documentation where it says this method does this, but the method doesn't really do that. But unit tests will always tell you if the code is actually conforming to the behavior specified in the tests. Agile will make problems visible early and often. So if you start jumping into Agile, it's not going to make the project run more smoothly. It's going to actually uncover all the problems in your project or in your organization, so that you can fix them when they're still cheap to fix. Because when problems are discovered later, they are expensive and difficult to fix. So expect initially to experience more problems, not less problems. Waterfall tends to reveal problems only later when they are very difficult to fix. They misuse the term self-organizing teams to mean, okay, we're self-organizing, so no more managers. Everybody do what they want. There's a reason we use self-organizing or self-managing with an ing, rather than self-organized or self-managed. It's a process and a characteristic, not something that is done. So we want, the best thing is we have people that are self-organizing and self-managing. But you still need management to get people there if they're not there yet. And you need management to bring them back if they tend to slip from that. What do we mean by self-organizing and self-managing? So we've got mature people who are responsible, self-directed, and again, courageous. So they are aligned with company objectives, solicits and provides feedback. Productivity is visible to the organization, works within financial and regulatory boundaries. If they're already doing this, nobody needs to hover over them. But if they're not, they're starting to slip away or they're not quite there, then you need management, you need managers. Agile control or agile feedback, actually when they say when they say something, it's because there's basis. You don't say, I'm almost done, I'm 90% done. You give numbers, or you give, the customer was happy, the customer's not using it. We got some web analytics and nobody actually used this feature. Or the customer's using this feature, so it means we should probably work more on this. You've got static analysis tools that give you cyclomatic complexity, checks on coding standards, checks on technical debt. They've got these new tools that, well, it's not so new, that will give you a dollar amount on how much technical debt you have already. Oh, you've got $40,000 of technical debt in our code. So you actually have more control in Agile because the stuff that you're basing decisions on are based on evidence. Most companies think it will take them only months to adopt Agile, but in truth it usually takes years. Because Agile is mainly a cultural shift. Because again, without the principles, without the values, you are actually trying to adopt lightweight processes. And those lightweight processes will not have any foundation. They'll fall apart if you don't have an underlying culture. Painful mistakes will be made along the way. Organizational changes will need to be made, not just to the development, but throughout the company. It's like it's asymptotic. Sometimes you have to work within constraints. Sometimes you have to work with people that are at different levels of maturity and awareness.